Hey, everybody. Give me a thumbs up. You can hear me okay? All right. I'll try not to scream. I kind of talk loud at these things usually. And you'll notice I wander around a lot. So my name is Jim Box. I'm a data scientist with our life sciences organization. I've been at SAS for 12-ish years. Been a SAS programmer since version 6.08. And I'm here to talk about our newest procedure that's available in VIA, and that's the proc R, right? And I think people are, if you're here, you probably know what R is, right? It basically, the open source language, I learned it in S+, back before R was even readily available. So back in the early 90s, we were using S+. That sort of turned into R, right? You know all this stuff, so I'm not going to go too much into it. And it's widely used across multiple industries. I'm in life sciences, so all my examples are life sciencey sort of stuff. But I don't think there's anything particular about life science that makes this interesting, which is why I didn't tag it with any particular industry. It all works sort of the same way. The reason that we've kind of pushed it with in life sciences is there's a lot of work being done on doing open source products for life sciences submissions, right? So big thing about life sciences is you have to submit data to regulatory agencies. So you have to be very careful about how you manage packages and how you have a validated environment is what we call it. I know the finance people have the same sort of thing. Other folks don't. But there's a whole bunch of activity being done. And traditionally, SAS hasn't been the friendliest with dealing with open source stuff, but we changed all that a couple years ago when we put Proc Python out, right? So we had a very tight integration with Python. And we started with Python because most people who are data scientists, they do Python. I'm imagining you guys are here because you came up as statisticians and you learned R in your stats class, right? That's kind of how that sort of works. That's how you tell the difference between a statistician and a data scientist, right? It's Python or R, or if they look at their data or not. So that's kind of why we wanted to go here. Now, we've always had some ability to do this, right? I think version 9.2 of SAS came out with Proc IML, where you could do R stuff. And I will say that that wasn't necessarily designed to do R stuff. It was more like somebody figured out, hey, IML is a matrix language. R is essentially a matrix language. I bet we can make this work. And that's kind of what we did, right? So the guy who came up with this Proc IML and doing the R stuff in Proc IML was kind of a side hustle. It was kind of something that, hey, I bet I can make this work. And we sort of made it work. And if you've ever done it, you've seen this. And the biggest problem is right here. If you've ever done IML, the idea that if you make a plot, you can't actually see it, right? It doesn't show up in the results window. You have to write it out to someplace in a GIF file or something. Now, there's some proc template nonsense you can do to bring it back in and have it show up in the results window, and I can actually give you that code if you want it. But this was like one of the drawbacks of R. In the first kind of release of SAS VIA, we actually came up with this thing called Proc Gateway. And Proc Gateway allows you to run R or Python in the same sort of concept, where you're just kind of telling it, I'm running this as R code. Proc Gateway still actually is useful to those of us who are going to do some R stuff, because one of the things that allows us to do, which is kind of tricky to do with R sometimes, is tell it I want to do a multi-threaded sort of procedure here. So I can actually run R multi-threaded inside a Proc Gateway. And that's available in VIA right now. And you can see that what we did is we actually did a group by in one of our models. So I'm just trying to do a model for just doing a GLM, and I've told it to use the group by. So it's actually going to run the men and the women separately in different threads. So if you have big data, you have a sort of big process you need to run, you can use Proc Gateway now and do R multi-threaded. Do the same thing with Python. You can just use as many threads as you have available to you. You can also connect R back to SAS, right? And then we have this thing called the SWAT package. And this works with SAS VIA. And what this lets you do is we actually have a library that's available called SWAT, SAS Wrapper for Analytic Transformations. And what I've done here is this is RStudio on my desktop. So this is my own version of R that I have control over the packages. I can do whatever sort of thing I want to do. And all I have to do is say, well, here is my VIA environment. Here's where the certificate lives. Here's what I want to connect to. I've actually prompted for my username and password. When I do that, I can make a connection to any data set that lives in VIA and treat it like an R data frame, right? So I've got some code in here that actually says, oh, let's just treat this as a data frame, and I can make SAS graphics, or R graphics, off a SAS data set. I can even do our Shiny apps this way, right? So if you have data that lives out in VIA data sets, you can do that. So these are all the things that are available now. And then last month, in the March release of VIA, we added in Proc R with the idea of let's make it a little bit easier to move back and forth between R language and SAS language. Our key things in here is you can execute any R code inside a block in a SAS program. You literally have proc R, submit, and submit, run. And everything inside is R code. You can move macro variables in and out. So I can define a macro variable in SAS, leverage it in R, can create one in R, leverage it in SAS. Really easy to move SAS7 BDAT files. All right, right now, we're actually leveraging some of the Haven package to do this, but in a nicer sort of way. I'll talk about what we're doing later. You can call SAS functions inside the R code. I'll show you that. So if there's a SAS function that you like, that you don't feel like R has a good one, like some of our text functions are really nice and easy to use. Maybe they're better than the R ones. You can call that in the middle of your R stuff. You can even tell it to run some SAS code inside the R that's running inside of SAS, and you can go turtles all the way down if you need to. But this is my favorite, right, is I can make the graphics show up in the results window. That was the thing that made me the most happy, was finally being able to do that. And I'm going to show you this. Let's look through it. We'll actually look at some code in here. So for moving data sets, it's literally SAS data set to a data frame, or the other way back is a data frame to a SAS data set. So this is how you'll move a SAS7 BDAT file into an R data frame, or vice versa, right? So we actually have the exact same concept with Proc Python, and we use the same syntax. So if you've ever seen Proc Python, the syntax should be very similar, right? But I'm just telling it, hey, grab the SAS help part data set, stick it in the data frame. Why we always call everything DF, I don't know, but I just didn't change it. Same thing here. I've got a data frame. I want to push it out to a STDM. That's a common library that we have. So that's the library. That's the data set name in the library there. And we can do the same thing with macro variables. We use SymGet and SymPut. SymGet is going to take the value of my SAS macro variable and make it available to me in R. So I can grab the sys user ID, and all of a sudden that's available inside the R code. Or I can develop a new macro variable and say, hey, put this value into that macro and let me see it in SAS. So let's look at that in live action. So again, with proc R, you always have this wrapper code, proc R, with a submit statement and submit run. Everything inside lines 4 through 12 is R code. It's really weird to say R code, make it not sound like it's a possessive. It's R. See, hear me saying capital R when I say that. But anyway, all I'm doing here is I'm saying, well, let's just go ahead and get the package list, right? That's all I'm doing. I'm doing simple R stuff. What version do I have? Where does R live? And what's my package list? Make it into a data frame. Then I'm saying, take that data frame and stick it into a work data set called packages. And then take these two macro variables and stick those into, so the version's going to go into a SAS macro variable called version. Location goes into one called location. And then here's my SAS code at the end. So I'm actually saying, grab that macro variable we defined up there, grab the location, and just print out the list of packages for me. And so when I run that, that's what I'll see, right? And really easy to run that, really easy to see. But the key point there is I defined macro variables inside of R and made them available inside of SAS. And I created a data frame inside of R and made it available inside of SAS. Right? Those are really, really key sort of things we did here. Next up are the functions. So I can run a SAS function and just tell it, hey, run this function. Here's a list of arguments. It'll run that inside of R. So again, if there is a specific SAS function that you like, I tend to find the text functions are really nice. I will do those. I do that in Python all the time. I can submit SAS code. What this does is it says, hey, run the SAS code that's inside this submit function at the end of the R program. So you saw at the end, the last thing I had like a proc SQL where I printed out the results. I could have had that inside the R in a submit thing at the end. It would have worked the same way. It will run the submit stuff at the end of the execution. Let's see how that works. So same sort of concept. I got a proc R and a submit. I'm in R code, so I'm just setting up the libraries. We're going to get the library question you have for me later. I've done this idea where I've said grab the SymGet. So I've defined a macro variable up here called sashelp.heart. I resolve that inside of this first set of parentheses, and then I'm turning that into an R data frame. So this DF now is just the sashelp.heart data set in an R data frame. But down here, I've done things like, hey, I did a filter on here. I grabbed the SAS help data set and said, well, let's just filter it out, get all the dead people, right? And I said, let's make a new SAS data set with the dead people in there. And then let's do a count. So I'm actually running an R function here, the n row dead. That's an R function. I'm putting it inside the simplet and saying, take the value of the count of the rows, stick it in the num dead function, and then down here on line 17, I'm telling it to run this SAS code at the end of the thing. And it's literally just doing the put statement, right? So it's gonna put that number into my log. And then down here on line 18, I'm saying, let's do an R value of this string run by that function, right? World's dumbest function, but you know what it does, so it's pretty simple and straightforward. And then I tell it to print. So when I run this code, it's gonna show me that there are 1,991 dead people in the sashelp.heart data set. And so it puts that in the log. And then anytime you're printing something, it's gonna print to the SAS log. I'm gonna show you how to do something different in just a second, but you can see that it did the prop case on that string, right? So what did we do? We talked about the idea of running functions and running submit statements inside of R, right? So that's a neat little thing we can do. Like I just said, if you're just doing the print, so if I'm just printing the header of this data frame I just set up, that's gonna show up in the log. Not the greatest thing, but it's, you know, it's ugly, but not horrible. But if I wanna look at it in the results window, I use the show function. Okay, new function, show function. That's gonna say, show me the data frame, put sashelp.heart as the title, and then just show me the first 15 records. So when I run that, that's gonna show up in my results window. Okay? Print prints the log, show shows in the result window. So those are fun. But here's the best one. Let's do some graphics, right? So what am I doing? I'm setting up my graphics sorted deal here where I've defined a few macro variables out in SAS land, right? So this is part of the SAS program. Told it to do the proc R, and now I'm just reading these things in to R variables. Don't have to do this. You can do all this in one step, right? But it can get really sort of confusing if you try to do this in one step. So I like putting them out here, so it's just easier for me to wrap my head around it when I do my rest of my R code. But now I have these 4 variables that are basically resolving the systolic, cholesterol status, and sex, and I've got the input table. So now I just do a ggplot. The way you get around to get it to show up, though, is you make the ggplot and you assign it to any sort of object. If I just do a ggplot, it's gonna write it out to a file someplace. If I tell it to make this object, it's gonna save this plot in object. We've all done that in R. And all I'm doing is I'm saying, all right, we identified these variables. Let's drop them in here. And then line 25 is the money shot. That's the R plot. So that's another one of those functions that we put in there specifically from SAS. And what the R plot will do is it'll show you the output in the results window. So you're gonna see the graphic that you're gonna wanna see. So now you have a program that's gonna reproduce this R graphic every time you want it to go by using the SAS macro variables and sort of pushing things around. So this to me is really, really cool. You can do any sort of graphical sort of thing that you want to do. And again, in life sciences, that's the main thing that people really want with R. They're not necessarily doing some of the other methods because, let's be honest, when you're doing life sciences, you're counting things. That's all we do is we count stuff, right? You guys probably do more interesting things in R. Life sciences, we're just counting stuff. We have some methodologies that are kind of nice, some things that make nice tables, but it's all about summarizing data. So we can do anything with models that we wanted to in here, but I like the graphics kind of coming out. One other feature that's new with SAS Viya, if you've never seen it, we have these things called custom steps, right? And all a custom step is, it's a way for you to make a little GUI interface to allow you to assign macro variables to a SAS program. And so that's all I've done here is I've just gone ahead and say, all right, let me just grab these variables, assign them to these values, and this is gonna pass all of these to a SAS macro program. You can do this now with anything, right? I usually show like a Kaplan-Meier curve with this and show how to make a Kaplan-Meier curve. But here, I've got I got a proc R in the background. So when I run this, it goes ahead and makes the R plot. And this is nice because it's hard to do a SAS scatter plot where you have a character and a numeric, right? Because we get really weird about that. You can do that really easily in R, right? So you get a really nice sort of view in here of how this works. The other thing that's kind of fun is that I told it to use BP_status, but it was easy to set it up so it knew to use the label. because when you use Haven and you're bringing in a SAS data set, it stores the labels someplace. So I just had a little function in there that grabbed the labels and put them in if you needed them. So really kind of nice to do that. So this is ProcR. Okay, what did we see? We saw moving data sets in between R and SAS. We saw moving macro variables in between R and SAS. We saw the ability to run SAS functions inside of R, which was kind of cool. We saw the ability to execute SAS code at the end of the show, which you may or may not ever do, right? It's in there, it might be fun. I kind of like it with the put statements because then I remember to do them, but you may or may not use that. And we use different SAS functions. So here's the question that you're all thinking about right away is, well, what about the packages? How do we control packages? What are we sort of doing there? Well, when you install R, and by you, I mean when your administrator is setting up VIA, one of the things we have is we have this thing called the open source configurator for VIA. And in that open source configurator, which is literally a YAML file, which just means yet another markup language file. That's literally what YAML means, right? You have these different things in here. So up the top, I'm telling it, well, where is R? What version of R am I installing, right? So I told it to go out to the rproject.org and grab the 443 R version. So you tell it, this is the version of R I want to install. The next line down here is, and these are the packages I want to install when I'm doing this. Now, some of these packages, if you don't like Tidyverse, has like 35 packages that comes with it. So it'll do all that. It'll do all the dependencies, it'll do all that sort of stuff. So you give it the package list. All right? Let me say that again. You give it the package list. We don't care. You can have whatever packages you kind of want to have sort of in there. That's up to you. And you can maintain the package list by reinstalling this if you want to later on. Because the common question everybody has is, well, what if I want to put a different package on there? The way that we're looking at this currently, and I'm going to talk about where we're moving, but the way we're looking at this currently, when you're using ProcR, think about it as that's a production environment. I want everybody to have the same version of the same packages, and I don't want that to change. That's really important in life sciences for repeatability and reproducibility. I'm sure it's important for a lot of you, but that's kind of the way that we've set this up currently, right? So you, the user, can't change any of this stuff. So when I'm talking to my customers, I say, look, you'll just have some sort of standard operating procedure that when you've decided you want a new package in there, you'll go through whatever steps you're gonna wanna go through, and you'll just sort of update the environment. And then the last thing is you can tell where the packages are. So if you have internally developed packages that some of you I know have done, you can just tell it, if they're not out on CRAN, you can tell it, look here for packages first and then go out and look someplace else, right? So all this is done at installation when you set up the R environment. It works exactly the same way as Python. The Python stuff is 3 lines up in this YAML file, and you're doing the exact same thing, telling it where the Python is, what's your list of packages for Python, and what are you kind of doing with them. What we're looking at doing next, and this is where I'm always going to want to hear feedback from people about, hey, what do you actually want to see in this? Because it is new. ProcR is new. They're going based off of, here's what I wanted at the very initial release, and I'm just one guy. Now it's time to crowdsource and find out what other things. And I'll tell you what, since I wrote this slide a month ago, they've already done a couple of them, right? One of them is this idea that you can do, you can actually run a program in R in SAS VIA. You can actually say, I just want to run R, and it'll do the wrappers for you. I don't really care about that, but some people like that, so you can just push it in R. We have these custom steps and flows. If you've never seen that, this won't mean anything to you, but we're going to make it easy to drop R programs in the middle of a flow. That's easy enough to do. We've done that with Python. We are kind of big on, I don't know, how many people have seen the VS Code extension? All right, so VS Code is Microsoft's Visual Studio Code thing. It's used by programmers everywhere. We made an extension for SAS in there. It's freely available now. You can do this now. You can point it to your SAS executable on your laptop. You can point this to 9.4. Has nothing to do with VIA. But we have this idea that you can use VS Code and do, like, if you've seen a Jupyter notebook, there's something in there called a SAS notebook that you can run code, and you can have Markdown language, and it stores the logs for you and all that. And by the way, I'm in the HLS booth over there. Come by, I'll show you anything you want to see. I can walk you through all this. But what we're going to do is we're going to make it easier to move back and forth between R, Python, and SAS in one block without doing the ProcR stuff. You just tell it, hey, this is the R section, and it'll do the R stuff. We're looking at the idea of not leveraging the Haven package right now because we're using Haven to move things from data frames to SAS data sets. We're looking at maybe making our own package for that. We're investigating. I don't know if we're going to do it or not, but we're always a little worried in open source that a package might not work later, right? Because who knows who's doing what with a package, something might change. So we want to try to take ownership and maybe come up with our own methods for doing that. So we're looking into this. But here's the big one. Bring in your own R environment. So one of the things that we're looking to do is right now, when you install VIA, you're installing R on the physical machine right there. We want to look at it as a container. So where we're headed towards is you can have a or many R containers that you've managed, and then we can point proc R at the container, right? Right now, it's all installed locally. Again, this is the first release of it, but where we're moving forward to is this idea that we want to have a containerized version. So you can have multiple R containers that you can archive, and we can kind of work on that. We've actually talked with some of the people that do an R thing that you're familiar with, and they're actually on board working with us to try to figure out how ways we can do that. Because we don't want to get into the package management world. There's other organizations that do that. So if they've got a validated environment for you to use, we want to be able to use it, and then we want to be able to have it so your complete R programmers who are unaware of SAS are using the exact same R environment that you're using, right? So we're working on things like that. And the idea there is that when you do that, you can bring in your own IDE. That's what we've got going on. That's what I wanted to show you. I am in the front booth, the very first booth. When you walk in, you'll see us, the HLS. I will be there almost all day today and tomorrow. I am happy to answer non-HLS people's questions about this because I want everybody to see this. And I want to gather your input and questions so I can take it back to the developers and show them how much interest. The fact that I've got standing room only in here is pretty darn exciting. It's a good indication that folks like this. So I actually need to take a picture to prove how important this was, right? Because I want R&D to know that we have a lot of people who value this sort of thing. I'm going to shoot over to Dan with the microphone, and if you have any questions, he'll ask you, and hopefully I'll hear them.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's give Jim a quick round of applause. Appreciate that. All right, so we've got a couple minutes for questions. If you just raise your hand, I'll get to you next, ma'am, and then we'll see how much time we have left.
So what's the purpose of keeping the submit and submit statements inside proc R? Is there any options involved if you have multiple of them, or?
So one of the things that you can do, I don't know, I honestly, Jeff, I don't know the exact reason for the submit and the not submit, but one of the things you can do right before the submit statement is you can tell it to refresh and reset the R environment. So you can tell it to not, because once you do proc R, it's carrying that R sort of session as you're going along. But with the submit statements in there, you can tell it, refresh this thing, start the R environment again. So that's a question I'm gonna have to ask exactly why that's in there for other people. I don't know why sometimes we have submits and other times not.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. I'm in life science as well. And open question for you. I'm not expecting an answer.
Good.
How is the authority going to react to this when we have to submit our programs?
So the same way they would react to any sort of submission of R anyway. People are starting to do submissions of R to regulatory environments. What you're going to need to do as part of the submission package is make it very clear how you manage the R environment and what specific packages and versions that you had on that submission, right? So however people are doing that with R now, it's going to be exactly the same. There's nothing different about the fact that you use proc R, where you're just going to be able to say, this is the version of SAS that we use, this is the version, the list of packages, and the versions of packages that we use on submission. That's where we're hoping that the idea of having an archive container will make it so if a regulatory agency knocks on your door 3 years from now, you'll be able to spin up that exact container and say, well, let's just run it again, I'll show you.
Excellent, thank you. One more question, Jim.
The people I know asking questions I don't like.
Hi, Jim. Yeah, I already asked you like 3 or 4 inconvenient questions. Now I'm going to ask normal one.
Okay.
You said about this submit function, which executes SAS code.
Yes.
And you mentioned it's executing at the end of the block.
At the end of the R block, yep.
If I have several, it just pushed everything at the bottom and then executes it? Or can I run some R code and go with submit and then go with another R code which calls back to what the submit did?
So if you want to have multiple steps back and forth between SAS and R, you need to close the submit block and open another one, which is another reason why you might do that. You might actually have submit and submit inside the same proc R statement, right? And that might be why they actually set that up to do it that way. But if you're doing the SAS code submits with that SAS function of submitting code, I'm not 100% sure exactly when it runs those, but it's going to give you the results just at the very end. But that might be something we can test.
All right, we got time for one more question, and you're the lucky winner. Hang on, let me get over there.
In the past, using ProcIML to invoke R, I always found debugging the R code within
Yeah.
the set to be a
Yeah.
nightmare.
Yeah.
What does that look like in this ProcR environment?
Right now, not much better. It's pretty much the idea that the thought is that you'll have sort of developed the R code beforehand, and then we'll sort of know what it's doing. So yeah, it's not the greatest, is the answer there. And we're looking at ways to make that a little bit more sort of interactive. But because you have to do the submit and end submit, you have to kind of go back and look and see what's going on. So you're going to want to do debugging steps. Not greatest. I get you.